My name is John Kenyon. I'm the Executive Director of the City of Literature organization here in Iowa City, and I'm really pleased to welcome you today to this panel. Normally you would see Chris Merrell here welcoming you, and he will be up here in a moment, but when the panel discussions and other events happen during the time of the Iowa City Book Festival, we incorporate them into what we're doing, and it is indeed Book Festival time. We have a rather long schedule this year, and so it's kind of unprecedented that we have two of these panel discussions as part of our festival, and we're very pleased that we can do that. The festival started on September 28th, and it runs through the 13th of this month. We are moving into the busiest part of our schedule with this weekend. We have a handful of events today, including two more in this room. One that might be of particular interest is a session with translator Curtis Bauer, who will be talking via Zoom with Maria Sanchez, who is a Spanish author whose book he translated, and we're very excited about that one. It will be at 6:30 in this space. And we also have a number of events tomorrow throughout town, including several here in this room, again, some on Sunday, and then through next Thursday. So we've really stretched it out. The festival program that hopefully you saw when you came in or will grab when you leave has all of the details about everything that's going on. For those who are watching from home, you can visit iowicitybookfestival.org to find out more about that full schedule. But again, we're so pleased with the partnership that we've had over the years with the International Writing Program at the university. They are definitely one of the jewels in Iowa City's literary crown, and one of the big reasons why Iowa City, a small town in the middle of the United States, definitely punches above its weight and is able to participate with all of these other cities around the world in our network. So thank you again for coming, and I'd like to turn things over to Christopher Merrell now.
Thank you, John. I'll put in a plug for Curtis's session this evening. He's one of the great translators of the age, and his new book with Maria Sanchez is a thing of wonder. Welcome to the Friday reading series of the International Writing Program's Fall Residency. For those of you who are new to our programming, we've given our writers a topic to consider and present to you today. Copies of these précis will be available next week on our website at iwp.uiowa.edu, where you can also find biographies and writing samples from our writers, 32 writers this fall from almost as many countries, and a schedule of our upcoming events. You can also find this information by scanning the QR code on the flyers at the back of this room. And now for today's panel, Writing the Not Self. Writers often create characters different from themselves in one way or another. When such a character is depicted as belonging to a distinct, recognizable group, perhaps a minority, what is the writer's responsibility to representing the other accurately, if any? Are there comparable challenges for one who writes from a marginalized position? Our first panel today is Safinah Danish Elahi, a Pakistani fiction writer and poet. She is the author of a book of poems, The Unbridled Romance of Love and Pain, which appeared in 2019, and two novels, most recently Eye on the Prize, which came out in 2020, and has also been turned into a TV film. She contributes to Pakistani newspapers and magazines and is the founder of Reverie Publishers, which seeks to guide her country's emerging Anglophone writers. Her participation in the Fall Residency is made possible by the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad. Next to her is Chen Su, a writer from the People's Republic of China, who became widely known with her iconic 2002 novel, Beijing Dal, which was translated into many languages. She has since published 5 additional novels, most recently the autobiographical Milk Teeth in 2019. Her works depict the complexity in which young people in China are situated and names the hidden pain of her generation while assuming a spiritual responsibility for it. Her participation in the Fall Residency is made possible by the Paul and Walling Nie Engel Fund. Our next panel, Endalegeta Kebede, is a fiction writer, poet, playwright, and researcher from Ethiopia. He's the author of over a dozen novels, stories, poems, and staged plays. Among his titles are Under the Dark Sky, The Defiant Woman, and Baalu, His Life and Works. With a PhD in Folklore Studies, he has been an arts director at the Ethiopian Academy of Science and the General Secretary of Ethiopian Writers Association. He is also the founder and general manager of the first book bank in Ethiopia, Zagol Book Bank. His participation in the Fall Residency is made possible by the U.S. Embassy in Addis Ababa. Our final panelist is Jamie Marina Lau, an Australian writer, musician, and the author of Pink Mountain on Locust Island, and Gunk Baby, which garnered her a number of awards. Her stories, nonfiction, and poetry have appeared in Minjin Cordite Poetry Review, Voice Works, and elsewhere. She also works with digital arts and music sound composition, and her participation in the Fall Residency is made possible by the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Consulate in Melbourne. And as always, what will happen is they'll deliver their brief talks, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. Please wait for the microphone to come and get you so that those who are at home will have the chance to hear the question as well. Safina.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly. Since the topic is writing the not self, I'd like to share a very quick story. My dear friend Bashul the other day said something, and I was really taken in by it. He said, it doesn't matter how cold it is outside. It matters how cold it is inside. And I was like, wow, that's really deep. And I went to him today and I said, Mashul, I'm really impressed by, you're a poet. I didn't know that. And I was like, it really matters what a good person you are. He's like, no, Safina. I meant how cold it is inside in my room because there's no heating. So that's a perfect example of being lost in translation, I think. Okay, I'll start with my paper. Creativity or reporting? Can you write my story? Can I write yours? I am a woman of color, married at 20, a mother at 22, my education a luxury, my career a calamity. I have loved, lost, overcome my obstacles, accepted my failures, humbled my successes, and made mistakes. Can you write my story? Every author writes the not self. The author is a modern construct, as Roland Barthes discusses in his essay, The Death of the Author. The idea of identity and origin behind the voice that was previously nominated to be a mere mediator, a simple narrator, whose individuality is to be lost, unknown as the subject space slips away in the negative, emphasizing the writing and not the genius of the author. In simple words, should it matter who writes as long as the writing holds value? If so, does it matter who is telling the story? Writers have long been asked to be politically correct, not an undemanding task. One ends up censoring their voice and hampering creativity. On the other hand, how responsible does the writer need to be? Who can write your voice? Can you only write characters you represent, or do justice to a voice that doesn't belong to you? Does one need to belong to an ethnicity to write a story about them? Can only the blind write about blindness? Can only someone autistic write about an autistic person? What if the marginalized community does not have the means and privilege to write that story? Is it not going to be told at all? Moreover, to tell that story, is the writer engaging with a capitalist agenda? Or indeed, do they want the story to be told even if it's not their own, because it's important? One can argue that only real experiences are the ones that can be told truthfully. Another person representing a voice may not only be unauthentic, but also take away a window of opportunity for those who belong to the respective community. It is also possible, however, that the writer does significant research and can represent a class, community, race, mental state, or gender in a fair and just manner. A writer can't have every character drawn from lived experiences. One cannot expect a writer to have murdered, to be able to think like a murderer, or to be a ghost to write about one. However, a few particulars need to be carefully examined for it to be an accurate depiction. Firstly, the character needs to be thoroughly researched. Research can include spending time with the community, understanding characteristics, behavior patterns, response mannerisms to certain stimuli, and then gauge how the character will operate in certain situations. Secondly, the writer has to come in with zero biases. Furthermore, if they come up with assumptions, they must be tested. The writer must avoid cliches and assumptions at all times. Research must also be done from a wide variety of interactions. In some cases, the writer may already have lived experiences that may be richer than any research. For example, being married to one from a different ethnicity or having a child who suffers from a special disease. If the writer wishes to write about it to make it easier for their readers, they must not alienate anything that doesn't fit into normative behavior. There are still similar challenges in writing from the other. The writer will still perceive the position of another in a character's life. One can overcome this by finding an emotion as close to empathy as using techniques and stylistic elements that do not clash with the character's reality. Then hope to sound as sincere as the circumstances of the character are. There's a sizable international debate about persons of color only being written by people of color, because many cultural nuances may be lost in translation. The delicacies of tradition and customs are not at all easily understood from a distance. As mentioned above, a writer's socialization affects their way of thinking and writing and may form incurable preconceived notions. One can then safely say, while being sensitive to the character being written, it is okay to treat a body of work with respect and justification, so it no longer has to be attached to the person of the author, but rather the merit of the research and authenticity of voice. So, dear writers, can you write my story?
It's very fast. Please forgive my English. I just realized Mo Yan used to hear, and I only have two comments as him. We both come from Shandong province, and our English are very bad. Okay. Writing on not self. There are people who have the capacity to imagine themselves as someone else. There are people who have no such capacity. When the lack of extremism, we call them psychopaths. And there are people who have the capacity but choose not to exercise it. J.M. Coetzee, The Lives of Animals. Writing the non-self has been on my mind in recent years. In the beginning, my writing was based on the experience of myself and my friends. We are the same type of people. My first few novels were about precisely this kind of people living in the big cities of China, mainly the capital city of Beijing. They like rock music and anti-mainstream culture. They are poets, rock musicians, university teachers, and so on. Inevitably, there are other people in my novels, ordinary people. I usually portray them negatively, uninteresting, conservative, and even obnoxious. They typically exist to set up two main characters. For example, the ordinary people, our second-handers in Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, did nothing but delay the protagonist's ambitions and make a living out of his genius. Ayn Rand divided the world into two kinds of people. Those who are geniuses, dedicated to making the world a more idealist place, and those who are annoyingly mortal, my previous novels were similar, with mostly three kinds of people in them. First, myself, and congeners recognized by me. Second, those who sympathize and understand us but still live by the rules. Third, those who loathe and trouble us. I remember a long-time reader and friend of mine with a non-mainstream taste telling me that I'm not only good at depicting protagonists, but also have a tiny supporting characters that are vivid. That is because they are based on people in real life. The light in their eyes, a smile, sometimes a word they said, can represent who and that they are. I like observing people and faint details that would fit someone's character or taste. Nothing is ordinary when you look closely at the details. Sometimes I love reading spy novels. They have a lot of details. Also, observing details make me nervous and jump sometimes. They are a crucial side effect of writing. After 20 years of writing fiction, both my readers and I feel that I'm always writing about the same kind of people. It's hard for me to write about a poor boy who is an apprentice, like the great writer Chekhov, or a woman who cheats on her husband, like in Madame Bovary. But maybe I can. I try to put more ink and sympathy into other people, which would make them more enjoyable as well. Like my congeners, it was unimaginable before, and now I can let it possible. I was started to experiment carefully in my short stories. I fictionalized a bus driver because I was riding a bus one day, and the driver was Asian. I don't know why. I rarely see Asian bus driver in Berlin. We made eye contact for less than 2 seconds. And those 2 short seconds set me into an instant fantasy. Maybe this man was here for me. Okay, I know it's just the imagination, but it did make me start to form a story in my mind. I focused on him. Story would be happen between us. Oh, what story would be happen between us? In my novel, I invested him as a Chinese man whose parents had been martyrs in Vietnam and then fled Vietnam to Germany because of the war between North and South Vietnam when he was 3 years old. Stories like that. I visited Oslo several months ago and inadvertently encountered several monks and bhikkhuni, I don't know how to pronounce it, of Vietnamese origin who had left Vietnam during the North-South Vietnamese War. The ability to correct something out of nothing, to imagine someone else's life, is so unique that sometimes I'm even a little bit afraid of it. So far in my novel, I'm still afraid of describing concreted injury and the pain of the flesh, especially details of the process of being injured, because it makes it hard for me to write and have psycho discomfort. And I did think about it, as Jim G. and Kochi said about Elizabeth Costello. She is not sure that writers who venture into the dark territory of the soul always return unscathed. Perhaps even in fiction works, even fiction characters, there is a moral constraint. I felt so uncomfortable when I read the Japanese writers Never Let Me Go that I even saw a book in a trash can on the road. I'm sorry for that, but I thought that in his writing, the clones finally understood the actresses and horrible act of destruction human had done to them, which was unacceptably cruel to me. If it were me, I wouldn't have written that, or at least I would have written about the anger inside the clones. This is the difference between my values and his. Writing about the others indeed shows the author's values. I don't know if I will be writing more about the others in the future. I hope I will be able to write as emotionally as I write my own stories. Writing with emotion is the most important thing to me. Characters cannot be puppets, and ethic comes as a principle for writing fiction. See people as ends and not as means. In other words, I want to write about each character's full range and contradictions without treating them as pens on a chessboard. Thank you.
Hello, hello everyone. This is great opportunity for me to be here, but I don't have any experience to talk about audience. Thank you, IWP coordinators, as usual. My topic is our ink serves as voice for those who cannot speak. In my novel, Shell, in Amharic Zagol, I tried to portray a character named Mesfin, an Ethiopian Jew. This group is known as Falasha, meaning immigrants, by the most significant part of northern society. However, the Jews believe that this name is being used against them, even believing that others refer to them as Buddha, a colloquium for those with the ability to cast an evil eye. And in fact, many people do suspect that the Falasha have the ability to cause harm to those who see them or are seen by them, making an effort to avoid this perceived evil damage, their likeness even. People marginalized and isolate the Falasha for a variety of reasons. Their way of life was simpler, and they typically relied on making poetry to survive. Additionally, the novel's protagonist Mesfin said, "I am like a gypsy. A gypsy has neither a home nor a place to return to. The entire world disdains the gypsy. People only enjoy their art and their music. The gypsies are constantly on the move. They are despised and are notorious for their constant begging to survive." This character, justifying himself in this way and the society I come from are the same. Although our career and handmade products are helpful, some Ethiopian communities do not consider us part of it. To them, we are outsiders. These are not the only groups experiencing inclusion and constant labeling, homeless and ruthless. Many people have been cut off from society in every corner of the world. Today, the most important thing to go beyond simply welcoming them and making them feel at home. They constantly experience risk on some level, always concerned that they want to be able to lead the everyday lives they aim for. There is hatred, harm, and even needless killing. Let me tell you about the Fugas clan. They are found in Ethiopia and are considered part of the Gurage society. However, their way of feeding, clothing, thinking, and life are quite different from the others. Fugas are relatively isolated. The rest of society does not interact much with them, like slaves. People don't want the Fugas on multiply in number. Yet, they are good medicine men. If accident happen to members of families, it is the Fugas who are sought to treat such people. I have seen several such kinds of things in our society. In Ethiopia, there is a place called Kaffa region, home of the Manjas tribe. Manjas are treated poorly and seen as part of the lower social class. The upper class claims that these Manjas are not trustworthy, that they are backward, and it puts that religious prohibits. Mainstream society tries them and throws them away as far possible, like outcasts everywhere. They face difficulties with social interaction and financial assistance. Like outcasts southern Ethiopia around the Omo River, in the 21st century, having a twin is often seen as a taboo and a curse, with problems following them as they grow up. The socially excluded groups hate both those who pushed them out and those who remained silent while they were pushed out. They despise those who choose to stay silent and complain about it. What does marginalization mean? I tried to make the point earlier that isolating means violating a person's human rights. Marginalizing and claiming that I am white and they are chaff undermines a person's position. It takes extreme greed to isolate others to that one's jewelry shines bright even while degrading other people's nakedness in the cold. Marginalizing others means that I don't mind if there is chaos as long as it doesn't get me into trouble. As Ernest Hemingway said, as a writer, you should not judge, you should understand. An author's primary task is to alleviate this indifference. It is not true that marginalized people have suffered losses and need our assistance. Instead, both the isolated and the isolators have suffered losses. They were detained the same of progress, religion, culture, and established social norms. The world undoubtedly lost a great deal of glory, greatness, and depth by isolating them. What will free these prisoners? Will it be ink? This is nothing new. The great author John Steinbeck frequently wrote about those marginalized and outcasts from society in Of Mice and Men. We see a character struggling because he had lost a leg in accident, a woman struggling because she is a woman, and another character because of his mental illness. More than anything else, creative works do a great job of assisting in the healing process of societies. We must listen to the voice of the tortured people. We have to stay awake, otherwise our silence will eventually scream back at us. Thank you.
Can you hear me? This is it? Yeah. All right. I wrote about the non-self and the non-place. So, to me, the question of writing the non-self is not whether to do it, but how to approach it. As writers, we naturally tilt between the parts of ourselves that we recognize and the parts of ourselves that we don't, before we try to locate how these parts manifest differently in others too. My idea of writing the non-self has always been informed by my writing of non-places. My novels have never really taken place anywhere in particular. Non-places, as Marc Auger coined, are supermodern, generically transient spaces where the individual experiences a sort of anonymity. Since beginning to write as a teenager, I had never felt the authority to write any of the exact locations I'd occupied or any of the exact locations my ancestors occupied. Maybe I was more interested in how we experienced space differently, or just the fact that I felt no particular attachment or belonging to them. Because my family moved around a lot when I was a child, I might have been prone to focus on how we put up and take down new spaces around us. My last book focused partly on furniture, branding, and transplanting flora. I wrote about the homes we create, like a second skin we keep shedding. I wonder if I write non-places and have relationships with space like this because I come from a family of nomads. 3 lineages of my family look blurry. There's no objective evidence of stable dwelling. And so I think about how the experience of belonging, how the regular perception of self mutated to match new environments. Growing up, these were probably the behaviors I had observed the most. The mannerisms of a temporary person, one who does not feel entitled to the space around them, one who does not feel entitled, oh, sorry, that's written twice. I like to think about the symbiosis of reaction and performance, one whose movements are timid and overcompensating, but most of all, one who is performative. As Kim Kardashian once said, I play into the perception of me, but it's not really me. This is the nucleus of a lot of my writing. I write characters via the teeth that wriggle in their mouth. I write characters who watch other characters, imitate them, and steal the words from another's lips, who watch the facial expressions of others, then readjust theirs. So many of my characters do not feel like they belong in the spaces that they inhabit, and by writing the non-place, I tend to explore how some of these characters do not even feel like they can belong in their own bodies, even if they are succeeding in playing a person who does. The tiny hints which suggest they still don't are in the way that their eyes shift to side, or the temptation to slightly clench their fists. There are varying degrees to which a person belongs and can find a self amidst particular spaces. I like to explore this by omitting direct descriptions of characters' appearances. Instead, I emphasize on the reactions towards them. Sometimes people feel their own belonging by making others not belong. Tactics for this are more subtle these days sometimes. A lot of the time, the one who have had to think about these subtleties, these small acts of violence, are also the ones who have inherited this hyper-awareness from their parents and ancestors. This hyper-awareness says everything about a character in a book. It's my personal way of exploring and trying to understand the varying degrees to which we feel safe and belonging, what informs the various dimensions of the self. I think a lot about how to write performance. It is a form of non-self that makes up so much of us. It seems to keep us safe, the many versions of the self that we gather. Writing characters that move this way is always interesting because they seem unreliable. A lot of the time, the world doesn't teach you how to be, it teaches you how to act. Sabine Selassie has a great quote. She says, "We are not separate from each other, but we don't always believe it. And we certainly don't always practice it. In fact, we practice the opposite, disconnection and domination." So a new question to explore is the practice of these versions of non-self or self. How do we regulate them and how does it affect others? Thank you.
Thank you. That was a really wonderful set of presentations. And before we open it up to questions, I want to tell you about some upcoming events. Join us later today at 5 o'clock for our weekly Shamba House reading, this week featuring Heichi Chu from Taiwan and Yuki Nagai from Japan. Tomorrow at 2:30, join us for a curator-guided tour of a hub, a network, and archive, 55 years of international writers in Iowa City at the University of Iowa's main library gallery. On Sunday at 4 o'clock, we have our weekly reading series at Prairie Lights Bookstore, where the writers Hien Trang from Vietnam, visiting writer Curtis Bauer from Texas A&M, an equally exotic place, as well as University of Iowa MFA candidate in poetry Brian Salinas will read from their work. Our next Cinematheque event is this Sunday at 7 o'clock in the Adler Journalism Building, room 105. We will be showing the 2020 documentary Ernesto on Earth, presented by Fatima Violata. And please join us next Friday for another presentation from our writers. The panel topic is, Does Anyone Write About Love Anymore? And it will take place in the main library gallery that is on campus. So now we'll open it up to questions. Illy has a microphone, and I see right here, 1, 2, yeah.
Thank you, everyone. I really love it because you have like different approach to the same subject. I also think that the subject writing about the North Self is very charming because like yesterday, Annie Ernaux, who won the Nobel Prize this year, she only writes autobiography novels and she only writes about herself. And I think that there are more and more writers, more and more novelists who decide to write only about themselves, and they don't find the meaning in making up a novel, a formulaic novels with everything like plot development, hero's journey, like kinds of characters, because they're not sincere, they're not honest. So do you think that a fictionalized novel can be honest and sincere?
What a good question. Yeah. Who wants to take it on? Yeah.
What's the question? But I'm very, very, very glad she got the prize, really, really, because it's encouraged me. Some of my readers, they really like my books, but others, they think it's not novels, it's not fiction, it's not literature. Yeah, sometimes I thought about myself too, but I think I can only write what I can. You know, I can write what only I can write, not I want to. I think that. I think so. I don't know what's the question.
I think that a writer does write from their lived experiences as well. But we do take moments out of our lives and then fictionalize them. For example, if there's an interaction with a friend, or if I'm thinking about a character who lives in Australia, for example, I have to put myself in their shoes and think that what is my ambition? Not my Safinah Danish Elahi's ambition, but my character who's a musician and who's looking for a gig in Australia. What is he thinking? There has to be some research put into it. I try and not be too ambitious with my characters. For example, I've still written characters that eventually end up in Pakistan because of the spaces and the experiences that they've lived have to be something in common with what I have lived through. But I think you can be sincere to characters that are not exactly you, because that's what I think a fiction writer does. You can't only talk about yourself. I mean, that would be a little bit.
Safina, could I just follow up on that? Could you talk a little bit about the research you do? You've mentioned it a bunch of times.
Yes.
What does that research consist of?
For me, I think I've only done very basic research because, like I said, I haven't written many ambitious characters, but I think I do put in a lot of traveling because of the different cultures that I've interacted with. I was writing about a plane crash, so I actually ended up talking to some pilots because I was like, I don't know exactly how the system works there. If I'm writing about mental health, I have to talk about approaching therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists. So I don't really know what is going to be prescribed unless I talk to some people. So it's mostly verbal research and a lot of Googling. Yeah. But yeah.
Okay.
I think if I write a book, a novel, I use the novel form. That's not real. That's not real. Even I write based on my real stories, really. And I just heard news from the Paris interviews I think there's no fiction and non-fiction right now. Really, it's all non-fiction. On fiction. Sorry, on fiction. All fiction. Here's no non-fiction for me. Even I write a poem. It's all of my imagine, all of my imagine.
Okay, my experience, every writer has his own choice, and most of the time I write a novel, and I researched a lot. I read and googled about that issue. Sometimes I create fictional characters. Sorry, my broken English, but I try a lot.
I think, kind of branching on you said, I think every writer has like a different sort of way of accessing the truth. So I guess it depends on how much you kind of create a self-delusion for yourself, I guess. So like for me, I know the easiest way to access my own biases and my own things that I need to work on as a person is to like kind of push myself away the most, but other people might be able to be more honest with themselves, and I think that that's kind of like what the practice of going to write a novel rather than going to write nonfiction does for me personally. But yeah.
I think first there and then to guys.
Thank you for the microphone. Can you hear me?
Little,
okay, this is my first time
louder.
asking a question since the beginning of the program. So my my question is going to be directed to my other brother, Endalegeta. So what do you think about African literature and the writing the non-self? You hear me?
Yeah. Most of our writers, African writers, focused on their society. I read one novel written by Chinua Achebe. The title is Things Fall Apart. He's always written about writing not self, equality, about women, marginalized people. That is, and conflict between change and culture. And the other one, Nadir Goldemir, in our country, in Ethiopia, Danyacho Worku, he's one of famous writer, novelist. He has 13 sons. He wrote about a slave, about otherness.
I think first guy is. No. No, guy.
I asked before.
Yeah. No.
Sorry. Thank you so much. Shunshu, you because as our colleague Chan say, everyone went to different direction, and you speak, Shunshu, about your small society of hipster of Beijing. What you think, and Jen, you speak exactly how to build the characters, and there's no space specifically, and then. Eldo and Endalegeta, you went direct to the people who didn't have voice, and this is you saw how you so a totally different subject. And then Safina, she speak about the politically correctness, and this has opened my mind for something, because we are in the age. Before us, you could do what you want. After us, I don't know. We are the writers of the age where everything should be politically correct. We should fix what the damage we did in the past. So I really didn't try to read Azra Bound anymore because he was a fascist. And I began to not taste Juan Miro and Salvador Dali because they stand with Franco. And I really avoid Heidegger because he was a Nazi, and now Adonis because he supported the Syrian dictatorship. And also a lot, we can find a lot. Even Shakespeare was anti-Semitic. All this, You understand me? Now we are in the time of our writing. Should we be free as a writer? And thank you, Safina, for mentioning this. Should be free as in our writing and not so sensitive? Or to not be boycotted like what happened? Or we should really be sensitive towards everything and we write this, it will be mild, not touching anything. Thank you.
That's a difficult question. Who wants to take it on?
I think it depends on what kind of risk the writer wants to take as well. You could be very sensitive and, like I mentioned so many times, keep researching on the right kind of voice. Or you could have an opinion as well. And it's okay to be creative and have an opinion and have a person say things that exactly is not politically correct. Because at some point, I think, when we're writing fiction, we have to be true to our voices as well. And as a writer, I think you just need to find a balance so it doesn't go either way. Risk it too much, boycott, offend, or go in, with a nuance that you have no idea about. So I think there has to be a balance between the two.
I really think it depends on the writer's personality. Yes, you just follow your heart. If you are Jean-Paul Sartre, you go to street. If you are Kafka, you stay at your room. Yeah. Really? Okay. I think we need freedom. Yes, we need more freedom. Yeah, and I already answered this question because sometimes I think about that too. Even in fictional works, even fictional characters, there is a moral construct. Yes, there's something we have to think about that.
So we should not care about politically correct and continue.
We should care, I think. But how much? We need to think about how much we can because we are very weakness too. We are human. Maybe too much darkness we can't carry it. Okay, I think, and too much darkness is really necessary to describe. It's really necessary to write. Maybe no. I don't know. If we can we know it very clearly, we will be famous.
Most of the time, I focused on voice for voiceless person. This is my choice. Let me tell you my experience. When I was a kid, I go to my grandfather's countryside, and I saw Fugas clan. Fugas clan, they don't have land, domestic animals. They are poor. They didn't chat with them, and I talk with them. My mother, my father, they are not happy because they are not human being. They are not human being. Of course, before 50 years ago, revolutionists at the dark regime, it is a little bit change. But still now, there are no land. And black Jews, I contact them. And I wrote about always outsider, most of the time.
It was really interesting to know that Falasha means
we need this on the mic, though.
Yeah, it's similar, yeah.
I was interested in your thoughts on how the process of writing about the not self in a conscientious way can change the writer themselves, so they end up with a different perspective on a human level and also as a writer.
Are you asking how the writer changes in the process?
Yeah.
Yes, I actually had an experience writing about grief and loss. And even though my character was going through something, I, for a while, talked about them like it was actually happening to me, because I was in and out every day thinking about the loss. And it was a child, losing a child. And because I have my own children, I kept, circling between thoughts. And I think that changed me a little. That novel changed me a little. And I do grasp grief now in a different way, just because I thought about it so much.
Oh, I can go. I'm constantly thinking about like utopia and dystopia. So I feel like that's something that kind of like sort of happens a lot. That's kind of like the discussion that I like to have in my writing, and it's kind of always like challenging myself like with the research of what that would look like in technical aspects and emotional aspects and like very interpersonal aspects. And so like I'm constantly kind of very inspired by like the idea of trying to find out what utopia would kind of look like, and knowing that, and dystopia, knowing that I'll never really reach it, but knowing that thinking about it actively is kind of good to be able to have that discussion with myself and have that discussion with other people as well. But yeah, thanks.
Returning to the question of my colleague about Annie Arnaud, about the autobiography, I think she hates that we call her work as autobiography. This is what I read, because she considers when she's taking the experience from individual to express the experience of other people, it's not becoming autobiography, okay? And the story of, she is objecting on fiction in novels. She said, when I put my work in the intersection of literature and sociology and the history, there is no need for fiction. This is a point of view. So I have an impression if there is an authority. So if the Roman has fiction, this is literature. And if there is no fiction, this is another category. Is this impression true? This is my question. And the second question is, do you consider, for Safina, do you consider writing novels hard work? Because I have this impression, for the poets, you can cover, sometimes if I see a poem, is it good or is it bad? Maybe the poets are hiding that, but after reading 3 lines from a novel, I discover if this novelist is good or bad. I think that writing novel is a hard thing. What do you think?
Yeah, it is. No, I think fiction, like you said, for me, fiction serves a lot of purpose. I'll give you an example, a personal example. I'm actually doing an MFA program, and one of the courses is queering the popular novel. And the first course book was Queer Theory, A Graphic History. And the second reading was Stone Butch Blues. And we had to record reactions towards, the course reading. And the theory bit was very dry, and I could relate at some point, but then I'm like, okay, I don't know, I just can't, through the pages, get, be empathetic or know what they're feeling. And then I read the book Stone Butch Blues, and I cried, because the characters written were in such a manner that I could feel exactly what the character was feeling. And I think that's what fiction does for you. They make you feel what the character is feeling, putting you in their shoes. And I think it's a fantastic thing to do, if you can make people feel that.
It's not a question, it's a small comment. I always think about what Rimbaud said, that I is the other or self is the other. I don't know how it is exactly in English. But for me, what Endale said about giving, for example, the voice to the voiceless, or generally to writing the other, you need really empathy and and less craft and a lot of imagination. But the same when you write about yourself or so-called autobiography, you must treat yourself as other. Like you must really step away and in a way to look at yourself and your life experience is just as something strange even. So I think it works both ways.
And then I think we have some questions back there. And I think Zaza's had her hand up for quite a while.
Hi, I'm teaching a creative writing class right now to undergraduates here at UIowa. And this week I got a piece that was a little bit troubling to me. It's a poem that's written from the perspective of an anti-immigrant white nationalist. And my first impulse was, I can't teach this. It's not politically correct. And then I've been thinking about it all week. So my question is, what about when you write the non-self, who's the oppressor, not the oppressed, or the perpetrator, not the victim? And I just want to thank you all for your essays because I'm going to assign these to my students.
Okay, I guess me again. It's a very interesting question because there are always two sides to a story, and even I'm just going to take it because I write fiction. I'm going to take it as a negative character. How do you write a negative character? Is it just bad? Is it all bad? Are there reasons behind a person's behavior? Is there a past, present that is making the character act in a certain way? As long as you're depicting that properly, I think you're doing justice to your character. I can understand why you would find that poem problematic because there are some things that you just can't write. There are some things that you have to be aware about. You just cannot take sides with a person who is, violent or, shows aggression. So somewhere there, I think, there has to be somewhere down the line a right and wrong or a black and white, and there are many shades of gray. But
Safina, if you give a voice to an oppressor, are you taking sides with this person? This is a question.
I think so, but that could be a personal opinion.
I think we have time for one more, and Zaza's had a hand up.
Thank you very much for all your presentations. They were really, really quite interesting. I have a question for each of you, different. For you, Jamie, have you ever been visited by a character who's outside of your own experience? And how were you able to try and figure out the authenticity of that character and portray that character as truthfully as possible? And then for Enda, you talked about how the isolated and those who are not isolated have all suffered. They've all had these experiences. What do you think can be done in order for there to be dialogue between the isolated and those that are not isolated? And then for Chunsu, you talked about how your life is the basis for your writing, is the inspiration for your writing. In terms of how to disclose, to make public without disclosing the private, how do you ensure that as you create a character that is inspired by yourself, you also ensure that you're not giving away things that might actually compromise your safety, or also maybe disclose details that other people who are in your life will not be interested in having made public? And then for Safina, in terms of...
Can I just, Zaza, we're at the very end. So you have, I can ask one writer to answer one question. So
okay, all right.
You've got about
thank
30
you.
seconds.
All right, thank you.
Do you have an answer?
Okay, Zaza, I agree to what you say, and I believe dialogue make change. Dialogue, it is important for isolated person, marginalized, and otherness. and we will write about them, and we know them. As previous said, Hemingway, as a writer, you should not judge, you should understand. We can understand what they thought, what they believe. But in our country, most of the time, there is no greeting, there is no chatting with others. And dialogue is important, and writing about them, film screening, stage play, and music.
And that's a wonderful place to stop. Thank you all so very much.